Hey, David.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Just hanging.
Well, I just did something dangerous. I updated some software on the best practices badge.
Oh,
And
goodness.
as you shouldn't update any libraries because things could go wrong. So I
No.
say that in jest. We actually are usually pretty good about updates, but it's a Rails app and we haven't updated and there's a major version update and my experience has always been there's some fiddliness, so we dealt with it. We dealt with it, and off we go.
All right. That's great. Good to
Yay!
hear.
Yay.
Nice. I actually just jumped off. There's like a Verizon Cyber Investment Hour.
Oh,
I like applied to it months ago and finally presented just today about salsa. It's kind of
oh,
cool.
cool. All
Yeah.
right.
There's like
Good
200
timing.
people. Yeah, it's neat. So,
Yeah. So the big push where we're announcing things to the world, I believe, is going to be the 19th.
yeah, yeah.
So
Hmm.
as far as I know, I mean, there's an incredible number of PRs that are flying across right now on
Right.
oh, wait, we should fix this. Oh, we should clean this up too.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I mean, I have no objections. It's just amusing to watch the, impending deadline.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Hate deadlines, but it's hard to beat them in terms of humans because otherwise we'll always, and I'm speaking to myself as well, we always want to push it till tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. What's that principle where the work expands as time allows? I forget what that one is.
Yes, yes. I don't know the name of it offhand, but yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, yeah, although also there's the other principle, which is work is always more work than you expect. Well, it's often more work than you were expecting.
Mm,
Um,
hmm.
it making something like this. I just mentioned this library update. The main parts of it were done almost instantly, and the last 10% took far more time.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm chatting with the
80/20
reproducer.
rule, really.
20% of the work takes 80% of the time.
It's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark, you're getting it over the wire. Pre-congratulations.
Free.
Really, really. I do want to
Promising.
commend Mark's hard work. Really. It's awesome to see. We're doing a big push to make people aware of it. And I mean, of course, the risk is, hey, great, it's coming to and there's more work to do. But I do think a congratulations, of where we are now is absolutely in order.
Yeah, I think very soon, well, there's going to be a lot of folks asking questions. How do I implement this in my tool?
Celebration plans. I mean, good idea. I don't know how you throw a virtual party.
We have something called Tiff's treats here. I already have salsa. I don't want salsa for delivery. uh, maybe a cookie that has salsa written on it. They actually will deliver cookies to you warm here. I don't know if other places have it, but yeah.
guess we should give a few more minutes for folks to show up. Also, folks would update the SIG notes with the other positioning and tooling. That'd be great.
Great.
Okay, it's 5 past the hour. I think we should get started. As always, please register attendance in the meeting minutes, which are just pasted in the chat. And a reminder to abide by the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct, which is in a link to which is in the meeting notes. Thanks everyone for joining for our monthly SLSA community meeting. First, I'd like to take time to welcome any new members. If you want to briefly say hi. Anybody new here? There might not be anyone there. Well, if you want to speak up, we're always happy to say hi. If I missed someone. We could jump into the special interest group updates. Looking at the list, I think most folks are already aware of this, but we have a 1.0 release planned for next week. The plan is to merge the changes in market as approved on Tuesday, April 18th, and then send out an announcement on Wednesday, April 19th. Oh, I should link to the pull requests that actually make this. Final. Let's see. Okay. Those are the 2 pull requests that actually make it mark it as an approved specification and make it the default version. I'm happy to go over like a summary of what's in it, but looking at the attendee list, I think most folks are familiar with that already. But if you'd like a brief summary of the changes, just speak up and I'm happy to do that. We got a bunch of feedback during the release candidate process that is mostly editorial in nature. It's not actually changes, changing the, okay, Sanka, I'll give a summary in a second. We had a bunch of feedback that results in editorial changes that it wouldn't be a breaking change to the specification. And so in order to get something out the door, we decided to release what we have and then kind of work through the editorial cleanup works, like there's things around more consistent terminology and making things a little bit more clear. So there's still certainly more work to be done. And then after the 1.0, the next major step would be creating the foundation for future tracks, like a source track, for example. Yeah, why don't I briefly present the what's new page? So here, I'll paste it into chat and into the meeting notes. And I'll present this. Oops. Okay, so briefly, in 1.0, oh, no problem. In 1.0, the main change is that we are taking what was in 0.1 and deferring the source track and the source requirements and what was called SLSA level 4 before, because we kind of finalizing them to what's stable 1.0. We felt like would take a lot more time, like quarters more work. So what we're doing is effectively marking roughly the first 3 levels as stable, and then we'll do further work to add more levels in that track, or more levels and change and go through more breadth and depth. The other major changes are division into multiple tracks, which I'll talk about in a second, simplifications, new guidance on verification, and updated schemas for our recommended formats. So in terms of stability, 1.0 is a stable release. It is not necessarily, 1.0 doesn't mark like it's complete, it contains everything we want to do, but rather it's a stable foundation on which we could add further breadth and depth in the future. In particular, what was in the old source requirements, like 2-party review and retention of source code, is not currently in the 1.0 spec. What was called SLSA level 4 before, hermetic builds, is also not a requirement because we kind of undefined that level temporarily. And also what was previously in the common requirements are now more guidelines. It doesn't mean they can't become requirements in the future, just that we didn't have enough consensus to be able to like solidify that and call something stable that we know won't change in the future. The other major change is tracks. Previously, we had just logically 1 track, SLSA levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and everything was bundled into this one set of levels. We decided to break it down into different tracks, each with their own set of levels that describe particular aspects of supply chain security. So what's currently defined in V1.0 is just a build track. And we've defined build levels 1 through 3. And in the future, we have plans for like a source track, maybe a vulnerabilities track, maybe a hardening track, something like that. We also changed the layout to the core specification. We improved terminology, rewrote the security levels overview page. We renamed what was formerly called requirements to producing artifacts, because it's instructions for the producer and the build system, and then added new guidance for distributing and verifying artifacts. And then some changes to the schema as well. Happy to go into any more details, but I think that's a brief summary. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, Melba, you brought up the what was it called, the SBOM thing. Let's,
Yes.
Can we
can wait to
show
the end
that
for that.
like after the SIG updates?
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. I'll put it just as an agenda item. And speaking of Melba, do you want to give a positioning update?
Sure. So this past month, we've been working with Jennifer Bly on the final press release for the 1.0. It was finalized and blessed, it seems, and it will go live April 19th, given that SLSA GAs on April 18th. In terms of other announcements around 1.0, there's been a series of blogs that we've been working on. Mike created the breadth and depth of SLSA, which is now live. Separately, Mike published a blog about salsa and Sigstore. I just wanted to put that out there, giving some recognition to Mike for advocating for salsa. There is a blog that I'm hoping that we can finalize, put in a PR by end of week, which is called Build versus Source. It's kind of an extension of the breadth and depth of salsa, where it is more detailed scenario of the why, because some people still don't get it, even with the FAQs and the descriptions. So we're hoping that these pictures, these scenarios can help people understand more about why we need different tracks for build versus source. And then there's a positioning development blog that we were working on late last year that we need eyes on, because salsa spec has changed so much since last year that we want to make sure it still makes sense. So would love for the group to chime in on that. That was several of us that worked on that blog last year, and we kind of put a pause. Any questions on that before I continue? No. So for the roadmap discussion, as you may or may not be aware of, I'm going to share this. Actually, I'm not going to share it because I have too many Chrome windows open. And last time I tried to share, I put something IBM confidential. So I'm not going to share my screen, but there's a link to the roadmap. If you go to slide 3, slide 2 and slide 3 are almost the same. We were having trouble, myself, Chris, Joshua Locke, and Aaron have contributed to this. We were having trouble trying to figure out how to define the priorities, right? Should we do it based off of scheduling, right? Or should we just say, this is what we're going to do in order? There's some reasons why we would want to put in like first half, second half timelines, because then people that need that type of information, I believe like the package manager integrations, they need to know what's going to happen when, so they can start planning for it. But at the same time, we are volunteers, and we don't necessarily hold to any deadlines, and that's fine. It can just be a target, but trying to get an answer around that, right? How do we present this information? And 2, are these the right things to put in here? And if so, what's the order? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I've been thinking more about this, and a colleague suggested that perhaps it could be useful, instead of doing exact dates or even half or quarter estimates, we do something like, we're working on this now, we're working on this next, and then we'll never work on this. So you have 3 buckets that are ordered against each other, but not necessarily with deadlines that we could miss. And
Okay.
any thoughts
So
on that?
Okay. People like that idea on what's coming up next versus. Go ahead, Mike and Aaron.
Yeah, no, I definitely like that. It kind of flows in with the way I've seen a lot of successful projects sort of work, and it kind of follows that also. It's slightly different than, you know, your must, should, could, would, won't. But I've seen this that sort of model be quite successful, so that folks don't constantly say, hey, you missed the date on this thing and I was prepping for it, especially when, you know, that's not the intention.
Okay, and I think Aaron, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Chris, that's a great idea, right? Just keeping it simple, and just kind of, we can sub prioritize in those buckets essentially, right? For ourselves. So I think that makes sense.
So what's coming up next? What was the second category? I forgot, Chris.
So it was pitched to me as now, next, never. So I guess
Oh, no.
what we're working on now is kind of what's coming next.
Got it.
Right. It's like almost like short term, long term, and then
Yeah.
out of scope, right? Essentially. But yeah, I like that way though, Chris.
Okay. So then, I don't know how you want to handle this, Mark, in this meeting. I would like to get some feedback on this. We've been trying for some time to do it asynchronously and offline, and we've not gotten any feedback. So I'm hoping that we can kind of just plow through this now. Not sure if you want to do that or not.
Yeah, why don't we just add it as an agenda item? So like
Okay.
table it for the time being, go through the
Okay.
rest of the SIG updates.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then put it wherever you think in the priority order of the list. Because we also want to talk with Hispana. So also that way we make sure that we get through the other topics too. Because I assume
Sounds
that
good.
the rest of the SIG updates won't be, long discussions, but rather just
Okay.
that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you. And that's pretty
Also,
much
the
it
reason why I
for
raised my
finishing.
hand is just we had put tentative dates in the original roadmap, and like we were off by like 6 months. We had said like we wanted to release 1.0 like in the fall, so I'd be hesitant to put any sort of dates, given our track record so far.
Sure. Yeah, that's it for positioning.
I'm guessing it's Mike for tool.
Sure. Couple things from the tooling group. There's a desire from a lot of the folks who are working on stuff like the SLSA generator, the SLSA verifier that's within the SLSA repo itself. A lot of those folks work West Coast time, or a few of them actually work out in Asia. And so there's desire to have an APAC friendly meeting. So that's something that's being discussed. So we'll probably do like an every other week sort of thing, East Coast, West Coast, with maybe one, a representative trying to kind of update each other as needed on anything that might be applicable there. I believe so in the chat, Ian Lewis has sort of volunteered to sort of help lead up that meeting. He's one of the folks from Google working out of Japan. So the trying to kind of just organize what time works best, because originally we were looking to kind of maybe make a time that worked best, and it seemed like half the folks wanted something that was APAC friendly, and the other half wanted something that was East Coast and Europe friendly. So we'll just kind of split it up into 2 meetings and have an every other meeting thing. Also, generally right now, I think because there's been all this focus to get the 1.0 spec out, it's been kind of quiet on the tooling side. We expect that to pick back up once 1.0 has been officially released, because then folks are going to start saying, okay, great, where are all the 1.0 compliant tools? Separately, I'm going to be super busy for the next few weeks between KubeCon, which starts next week, and Open Source Summit NA, which is a couple of weeks after that. So I'm going to be super busy and might not be able to sort of manage those meetings. So if somebody can, help out there, definitely interested in getting some help to kind of help run those meetings while I'm unavailable. Next, there was a desire from end users for fully open source salsa builders. Not a lot of work in that space. A few end users said, hey, what if I don't use GitHub? There doesn't seem to be a lot there. And that desire also seemed to be mostly from folks who were interested in salsifying their existing like CI systems as opposed to adopting something new. So for example, there's a few folks who might be interested in adopting something like Fresca, but most folks were like, no, I want to take what I have and turn that into a salsa compliant builder. Before I move it, Mark.
So to clarify, this is for folks who want to run their own instance of a builder.
Yeah, so this is stuff like, there's a lot of companies that are, let's say your big enterprises of the world who are like, yeah, I'm not using GitHub Actions, I'm not using GitLab, especially as a service. I'm running self-hosted builders, and whether it's I'm running a Jenkins server with a bunch of stuff, and or I'm running Tecton, or in certain cases a handful of folks running Fresca. Like, hey, how do I make that compliant with Salsa without having to switch over to stuff there? And it seemed like a lot of folks were less interested in sort of the pipeline aspect and more of just like, hey, how can I just create a secure builder? And so, the idea there being less of like, hey, your entire pipeline is Salsa, and more like this compilation piece is Salsa, and that's kind of the most important piece to Salsify.
Yeah, a related thing is a topic that was recently brought up when we added to the future directions page around like possibly a future like operations track or similar, because the current Salsa build requirements are around kind of the application layer, like the behavior of the application, but it doesn't say, we're kind of quiet on how you run such a service, but running such a service is like really half, like,
Yes.
like just equally as important, right? And so if you have like a fully Salsa open source builder, but then you run it and everyone at the company has access to it, can SSH to it or something like that, or they can all access the private keys, it doesn't do any good. And so, so that's probably an area where like future specification work might also help as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, this is just something I've been playing around with, but in my like 20% sort of time, is potentially something like a open source Salsa builder that would, it's not a CI system. The idea is it was something that you call that runs isolated builds in very, very specific secure sorts of ways. And I'm hoping, maybe closer to June, I'll have something to show off on that front. And so the idea was it would be something that you call from Jenkins or you call from Tecton to then run the actual secure build piece. And it's not intended to be sort of a generic, task runner like Tecton and Jenkins are. So that's that. There is a tooling 1.0 support tracking issue. Just, once again, there's a bunch of folks who've been looking at the release candidates and sort of prepping code. So this is like folks like Cosign and the various Salsa generator stuff that we've been, working with, and some other tools in there. NPM has a tracking issue for this as well. So there's a bunch of things there that folks do plan to support. Salsa from it's a lot of folks in the sort of like, how do I generate Salsa provenance, just even like as a library or whatever. There also seem to be some interest as in maybe Salsa framework providing something like a Golang, let's say, representative example of Salsa compliant library that can do validation, not verification, like validation of the spec, as well as generating of the spec that maybe other tools could just use, as opposed to having to make sure that they, apply the spec correctly. So there's some stuff there. Separately, there's also, based on some of the conversations, even in the specification group, there seemed to be some groups that were a little unaware that Salsa was about to go 1.0 and that there's been some big shifts and changes. So I've been reaching out to some of the open source groups like Kubernetes that have begun to already apply Salsa, and they do plan to kind of bump it up and bump up compliance. So there is a tracking issue for some of those projects, and I kind of put in there that one of the reasons why we also want to do that is we want to help out, obviously, to help secure the open source supply chain. But in addition to that, it helps with Salsa adoption, because if a few folks see, hey, Kubernetes has adopted Salsa, other folks might be a bit more inclined to. And in addition to that, I think helping out with some of those projects, even just in like helping point them in the right direction and helping some of that, it provides us with the experience we need to generate sort of generate guides for folks to help, in other folks' adoption, help provide content for that. So there's a tracking issue for that. That's also in the document. Still looking for more hands-on keyboard folks to join the meeting. Folks who can actually we can help coordinate and make sure that we're not all kind of going in different directions on some of the Salsa tooling stuff. And then finally, there's still a desire among end users for something like a straightforward way to ingest Salsa and other supply chain metadata like SBOMs and those sorts of things. And so one of the things that was brought up was something like general guidelines for distributing SBOMs, Salsa attestations, VEX documents, yada yada, because most folks want to say, hey, I don't want to have to have have like 12 different tools to ingest all these different documents. I want, you know, 1 or 2 tools that can ingest all of these different documents. And the same way that folks who are looking at building tools that can ingest, consume those documents, provide metadata, don't want to have like a ton of specific code for here's how I ingest an SBOM from Ruby Gems, here's how I ingest an SBOM from NPM, which is going to be completely different, and here's how I ingest SLSA attestation, which once again is completely different from you know, in each of those ecosystems as well. I think the thing that folks have brought up is that they want something consistent, and once again, getting the open source, we totally recognize that getting the open source community, especially different package ecosystems, to agree to anything is quite difficult. But even a set of general guidelines like, oh, the REST endpoint, or not REST endpoint, I don't want to say REST because I don't want to say API, but the routes or the areas that these things should be downloaded from have generally relatively consistent naming, maybe, hopefully, if everything turns out right. And then that will help folks who are looking to consume you know, documents like SLSA, so they don't have to have a ton of custom logic for every single ecosystem. That stuff is still going to be, I think, a very long set of conversations. And that's it for me.
Any questions on that? Marcella?
Yeah, so I guess I'm wearing kind of 2 hats right now. I'm sort of trying to get back into SLSA. I've just had a lot of conflicts the past few weeks. But I'm also wearing the sort of in-toto attestation maintainer hat. So is there anything from the in-toto side that we could sort of collaborate more closely on the tooling end to sort of ease some of that? Because that is sort of one of the main or one of the benefits, right? That if everyone just sort of used a DISI envelope, for example, that might ease some of these adoption questions.
Sure. So there's a couple of things from my end. I think a handful of it, and I know there is some interest there of having something like a dictionary of I know from like, I'm just talking from like an end user perspective, what folks are looking for is something like a here are a set of in-toto attestations that are, let's say, well supported, right? Anybody can make their own in-toto attestation, and having a library that can, you know, maybe have additional logic in there that's, you know, specific for those attestations. It can help map it to something like an ontology eventually would be really nice. And then separately, I think the thing that folks are looking at is like, okay, for cases where that's not possible, can we also can we just have something that can generically parse some of that stuff, and then generically parse in-toto attestations, not necessarily all the additional logic. And then one of the things I know folks have been looking at is, hey, it'd be really great if there's a way to encode the schema for a particular in-toto attestation via that URL, so that folks who are consuming can just sort of say, great, if I don't have that information locally, can I just reach out to that URL, fetch information about how to parse, and then can kind of continue on. I think those are some big things on that front.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, how to parse the document inside of an in-toto attestation that already is encoded in the schema. So it sounds like it's kind of a matter of just understanding what that schema is and all that. But yeah, I'll let Trishant go.
Thanks, Marcella. Yeah, so if there's something that folks would like to see from the in-toto side, the steering committee just recently formed, and this is exactly the sort of feedback that we would love. So please let us know. And also Aditya, who's also, I think, is on this call, might be able to speak about some of the existing work about, you know, upcoming tooling.
Yeah, I am. But I think the highlights were mostly covered by Marcella. I was not going to speak up, but Marcella mostly covered those points. To Michael's point to an extent about eventually mapping predicates to ontology and things like that, we're certainly looking at it from the Intoto perspective as well, especially as we're now working on updating Intoto layouts or policies to support attestations and things like that. How can I write a policy that can accept multiple predicates that maybe are semantically equivalent for the purposes of my policy and things like that. So yeah, definitely I think we're working towards similar things there.
Yeah, and to give you a practical example, just real quick, the guac team, that has been sort of doing this is we've been ingesting, right, all the salsa attestations we can find, and there's not a ton of public ones, but Kubernetes actually has a lot. And we've been parsing through them and sort of mapping them into sort of guac's internal data model. But there's definitely the case of like, hey, if we need to sort of have a lot of specific logic on parsing each individual document as opposed to having a way to kind of more easily kind of pull that in. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Should I move on to the next topic? SBOM? Or no, but do you think it's higher priority? Well, David, also, if there's quick notes, maybe we should do those before diving into a deeper discussion. You're muted.
If I talk when I turn off the mute button, that'd be even better. Yeah, so I put some little notes in there. I just some quick notes, just basically, begging everybody else to spread the word. I'm certainly going to, in the 19th thing, and also just long term. And I know Jay will be happy for me to say this, but let's. I just would love for SLSA folks, please take a look and let's make sure that S2C 2F and SLSA. I'm not expecting to say exactly, cover exactly the same topics. I mean, it's fine if S2C2F covers things that SLSA doesn't. Frankly, I expect that, but I want to make sure that these two are not in conflict anywhere. And if so, let's make sure we raise that up quick and address whatever the issue is.
Yeah, I know. I think Joshua Locke is not here, but he said he had done a pass and at least he didn't see anything that seemed in conflict. So that's maybe one piece of feedback.
Thank you. And I see Jay's knows much more about the reaction buttons. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. And Melba, do you want to talk about the SBOM stuff first or the roadmap first?
I think the SBOM, it might be quicker than the roadmap, because the roadmap can get into all sorts of different things. And so if I'm going to open up this PR was around an FAQ item on SBOMs. And so when I looked at the language, I put my comments in here. The salsa.dev website, the way they define it is very similar to NIST. But the actual FAQ, the way, oh, wait, where did it go? Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe it's worth just briefly giving a brief context in case folks haven't seen that particular pull request.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, briefly, someone asked about whether SLSA has anything to. SLSA says nothing about SBOM. I mentioned, I think it's that we really should say something about SBOM because it's like on top of people's mind. And so I put it in a comment of like, well, my personal take is this. I don't know if it's consensus. I don't think it's consensus opinion. So Joshua took the next step of like, okay, well, let's try a pull request to see what people think. So that's a brief context.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm trying to find the latest modified, so that's what I was trying to do is, I think it's this one is the latest. But I can't find a file change. There it goes. Why? There it is. Okay, so this is what it talks about SBOMs, right? So when it says that SBOM is typically focused on understanding the software, right, and known vulnerabilities, that's partial, right? Per the definition on salsa.dev, which is very similar to NIST, SBOM is also about provenance of that software. And so the definition of provenance here is different than what's on salsa.dev. And so that's what I was trying to show here, that one, there seems to be a discrepancy between salsa.dev and this FAQ. But then additionally, the verbiage that says, while an SBOM is not well suited as a requirement for the build track, SBOMs are good practice, blah, 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 blah. I don't necessarily agree with that because, again, SBOM it can't handle provenance. And therefore, if we think about the build system, the provenance of the build system, not of the actions it's doing, but the software that makes the build system, SBOM can be used for that. Additionally, to say that, SBOM is not suited, you could probably say that SBOM is traditionally not well defined for build actions and configurations, if that's what you're intending, because there are other specifications that are trying to do that. So I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity, and then also fixing the discrepancy between this FAQ and the salsa.dev. I like the salsa.dev definition. It is closely aligning with what the industry is looking at right now, but not so much what this FAQ says. Oh, go ahead, Mark, sorry.
Yeah, I haven't had time to comment on the particular pull request. And the reason why I had said my original thing in a GitHub comment as opposed to sending a PR is because I think it's going to be, it takes some time to like really come up with wording that is clear and we all agree with. Maybe a more accurate way to say it would be that in practice, the SBOM tooling and formats that exist today are they're not, or maybe the other way around. What Salsa needs for the build track is a particular thing, type of information generated by like the control plane of a build system. And to the SBOM formats that exist today, the format doesn't make that particularly easy to do. And also that data, I think when people usually think of an SBOM, they think of kind of more finer grained information than the Salsa provenance would give them. And so, yeah, I agree that it's not accurate to say that SBOM can't support it because SBOM is very, very general, can contain lots and lots and lots of different type of data, loads of abstraction. So I guess in my mind, it's more about like, in most cases today, as tools exist today, there will likely be provenance generated by the build system. That's just like the overall thing. And then more fine-grained SBOM tooling that is about the kind of the more detailed steps of what happens. It's more like in practice rather than theoretically, that's what ought to happen. At least that's my mind. I don't know how to word that, and I also don't know if others agree.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I agree with Mark. Like it's more of, we're talking more about build provenance. So it's the provenance of how an artifact kind of went from source to this thing. And it's also, there's a bunch of other properties, whereas, I think NIST really did a bit of a disservice by lumping like a lot of things in there, because I mean, if you look at sort of the proliferation of all the different bombs, right? We have network bombs and D bombs and pipeline bombs, and like there's a lot of these different things that are trying to each say, no, we're a superset of all of this. And I think where Salsa's strength is actually, no, we are laser focused on this thing. And that's kind of where we're coming through. I don't know how I would word that, because I agree, like there is an element there of like SBOMs do describe an element of provenance, like, hey, this thing depends on a thing and this is where it came from. Salsa is very much focused on like, hey, we're doing, you know, we're sort of saying, here are the things that were included as part of the build. Because once again, like, you know, there are runtime dependencies that Salsa would do nothing with, right? It makes no claim about that. And I'm not sure how we word it, but I just want to make sure that that's clear, and also makes folks understand as well that like it shouldn't get lost in the mix of all the stuff that people are talking about, because you know you talk to everybody and everybody has a bomb format that does everything, and we're trying to say, well, actually we view that to be maybe not very helpful, because we think that you know the key here is about really hitting these things and what can you prove about those things.
Yeah, and completely agree, and that's why I started to question this, right? Because SBOM is a huge focus, right? And I think today is supposed to be a major announce day for the executive order on whether or not June is the official time where everybody has to comply with SBOMs and other things. And so it will be top of mind for the next couple months. So we have to make sure that we're very clear on, okay, we're talking about build provenance, which includes things like you said, the trusted control plane give examples like, you know, what tecton tasks it's doing, et cetera, et cetera. If you give examples, then versus a software bill of material, which is more tailored towards the software components that make up the thing that you're building, or the software that it comprises of the build, right? So Jenkins, right? There should be an SBOM of Jenkins, and that maybe at a future date, if we don't do it today, we will ingest an SBOM, because I believe we've had discussions about that. But yeah, this just needs to be a little clearer, because right now I definitely don't agree with the way it's worded. Go ahead, Arnold.
Yeah, so as I said in my comment, I think, you know, what's important is to recognize those things are moving quickly, right? And so in my opinion, what's more important is to acknowledge that, you know, these are moving parts. I mean, in provenance, we already have some, you know, option to have dependencies, which is clearly the realm of SBOMs. And SBOMs are evolving towards having some kind of provenance information. I mean, the Cyclone DX, a formulation that they claim does everything. I mean, if you ask them, they'll say, I challenge you to come up with something you have in provenance that's not, you know, in formulation. And I don't want to get into, you know, a piecing contest as to which one is better. But so I think we have to acknowledge that these things are moving parts and we don't really know how things will end. I think we have to, we're better off if we describe the way things are today with those challenges, that we don't know how they are going to evolve, and there is some overlap.
So yeah, I just wanted to you know, bring this to light and try to explain verbally. Sometimes Slack or, you know, PRs don't necessarily get my point across. So usually I do better when I'm speaking with someone about, you know, why this is bothering me so much, and we need to change it, because this, I think we're going to get a lot of pushback if it's written this way.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with iterating it, and maybe even just mark it as like a draft PR, so we could just continue revising it until we have something that we have broad consensus on.
Yeah, indeed, I think you can argue that SBOMs may include provenance information, but the whole
There
point
you go.
of SLSA is specifically to, explain what are the requirements of the build, and then explain that provenance. I like that phrase, laser focused, and maybe throw in the word historically somewhere.
Oh, thank you, Trishank. Can you put a link to that? I see the SBOM project.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So sorry. I should also mention it in the meeting. Yeah, so the SBOM project is a project that that we're planning to incubate under OpenSSF. I don't think it's fully official yet. But the idea is to have SBOMs that you could verify technically within Toto. And so I don't think there's any contradiction between things like SBOMs and Salson and Toto. Let me post the link.
Thank you. I think the next item, if no one has anything else, is the roadmap. We only have a couple minutes, but hopefully we can make some progress. Let me zoom in here and try to get rid of some of these comments. How do I? Anybody knows how to get rid of the comments? I would appreciate if we could.
So I think there is a way under the under the full menu. I think maybe on the right hand side. If
Right
you click
hand
that
side.
down arrow, maybe that'll expand out. Yeah, I think if you there's a way to is it under view? I think.
If you click the slideshow button, it'll just show the thing.
But I wouldn't be able to edit the slide, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so you, under show comments under view, yeah, you can just click
Oh,
that.
thank you. Thank you. Okay. So some of the things we had talked about, anytime I try to zoom in with my mouse, it goes to a different slide. Build level 1 versus 3 is pretty much around the corner, right? And same thing with the provenance specification. We at one point talked about creating guidelines for post 1.0 track, or guidelines for a track post 1.0. Do you think that this would come next? Like, the working on now from a priority perspective, and I can't see people's screen. I had to minimize it in order to see the screen. So if people have their hands raised or are saying something, I won't be able to see.
I do think, yeah, I mean, I think the one of the based on the conversation, especially given a lot of folks are going to be asking this, I think one of the top priorities is I'm blanking on his name, so I apologize. I think it was from Sousa, who had talked about like we need a SLSA builder build system specification. I think that would probably be the #1 thing. Because a lot of folks are going to start asking like, okay, cool, how do I make my build system secure in a way that, we would feel confident that it is generating accurate SLSA provenance and not just telling us that it's, generating SLSA v3. Like how does somebody enforce the, isolated requirement?
That sounds like it would just be integrated with the current build track. It would be like
No,
a sub.
It would be different because I think the idea here is the build track is a and Mark, correct me if you think I'm off base here, but the feeling we got, or the feeling I got from the conversation was it would be different because it's just here's good ways to make a secure build, And here's how it then integrates into allowing you to make a SLSA level 3 or whatever. But it's different because it's different audiences. One audience is, hey, I have a project, I want to make sure that the provenance is secure against this thing. I use the SLSA build track. I want to make sure that the builders are providing that SLSA build provenance accurately. That's where, I'm an infrastructure engineer versus a developer, right? Who there might be different audiences there.
Okay. Yeah, we can circle back on that, because even with that description, I still think it fits under there, but we'll table that. What about the source, level 1? I just put level 1, 2. It doesn't have to be level 1 and 2. It could be level 1 to 4. But there was some thought that this could be done in parallel with SLSA build level 4. And given our track record, I'm not so sure that it could be done in parallel. So just trying to get a sense of where do these fit in the priority list? Again, I can't see people. Are there no comments, Mark? Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, right. So for what it's worth, if people are willing and available, I certainly hope that we try to parallelize build level 4 and the source track, because that is one of the purported benefits of splitting into tracks. In terms of priority, I suspect that source levels 1 and 2 would come together faster than build level 4. So if we're not able to parallelize it, I would guess that's happening first, but that's just a hunch.
Okay, so then I'll keep this the same way, and it sounds like, well, I know you, Chris, mentioned, you and Josh think that it could be simultaneous. If others disagree, please speak up now, because I can't see or hear. Unless
so
you speak.
I agree with Chris, and I think we would have implementation of the source track faster than the build level 4.
Could we do it in parallel is the question.
Well, it's a matter of resources. I mean, much time can people put into this? So.
Yeah, and that's my concern, right? Okay, so I'll leave this like this for now. What about any sort of tooling? People are going to be asking for, well, how do I do this? And how do I verify? And right, so where does this fit in the mix?
Jay?
Oh yeah. I was gonna comment on the on topic before. I think a build level 4 should wait a while. Let 1.0 breathe in its current form, while we focus on source, and then after we get source out, then we can focus on the level 4 for build. I mean, what I would hate to have happen is during the course of a level 4, we find some, we will more and more likely will find gaps, but things that put some heart palpitations in for those that have reached level 3 or level 2 or level 3, but then find that what was level 2 or level 3 is no longer level 2 or level 3 or what have you, because we've discovered new pieces of information that contribute better to level 4. So that may raise up some and diminish diminish others. That was all I was going to say there.
So thoughts on the tooling, folks?
Between like working on source or build or whatever other track, I would imagine, because like this is like this is an open source project and we're not paying people to do this. that it would be whatever contributors are willing to work on it. And so I think if people have the bandwidth to think about source and they think it's important, then they would kind of start and try to get momentum there. I think if there's folks who have a desire to define a level 4 because they have a need for it, they could get momentum there. And I think it's hard for me to know like which direction we go. I would also imagine source would come first because it seems like a higher priority. But I think I guess there's hard questions in both. Neither seems like an easy thing to add because the big question is like how we would verify it and how it actually work. So I would imagine it might be kind of some of like, we make some progress here, we make some progress there, and eventually it materializes into something that we're pretty confident with that we could actually release.
Okay. Yeah, I know we're at time, but if folks can kind of take a look at this and put comments on what you think the bucket should be, then we'll be that much closer to having this not only for Open Source Summit, but for the next, supply chain integrity working group positioning meeting, so that people can take a look at, as well as the biweekly and the specification call for that matter.
Yeah, and one thing just to add at the very end here, yeah, I definitely want to echo Mark's statement about, hey, everybody's volunteers here. So I think one of the challenges we've had with some of the tooling, right? People are going to be expecting tooling, especially open source tooling, and we need to provide incentives for folks to put hands on keyboard and help out with the tooling. And we could talk about that out of offline.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So yes, please post your comments in the roadmap. That would be very much appreciated. So we can also get that out and potentially even publish it on the salsa.dev website. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, everyone. Bye.
You.